the phosphorus cycle. We're going to talk about where it comes from and where it goes. Now, usually you're not going to see phosphorus all by itself because it's very reactive. If it comes in contact with oxygen, it burns, as shown here. So what you're actually going to see more commonly is phosphate. And that's just one phosphorus attached to 4 oxygen atoms. And that's what's shown in orange there is the phosphorus. And there are 2 molecules found in living things that contain phosphate, ATP and DNA. ATP, all of these individual little orange things, those are all phosphates. What they do is store energy between the bonds. Oh, nobody knows what that means, Celine. The phosphorus cycle. We're going to track where it comes from and where it goes. Usually you're not going to see phosphorus by itself. It's very reactive. If it comes in contact with oxygen, this is what happens. It burns. So what you're going to find instead is we usually talk about phosphate. And what that is 1 phosphorus and 4 oxygens bonded together. 2 very critical molecules that contain phosphate in living things are ATP and DNA. ATP, it's kind of like the battery of the cell. It contains these phosphate groups, and between them there are bonds, and those bonds have a lot of energy in them. And so when you break those bonds, then you release that energy. So we wouldn't be able to power our cells without ATP. DNA, you can see here around the outside, it's giving structure to the DNA. So that's what phosphate does in DNA, it gives it structure. Let's take a look at the cycle. So the place that you're going to find most phosphates is in the soil. And plants are going to take it up from the soil and use it to make ATP, DNA. Other living things like cows, pigs, they get their phosphates from eating plants. And then when that pig or that cow, when they defecate, that ends up back in the soil, those phosphates. Or when something dies, we'll have a dead plant here. That dead plant is going to decay and put its phosphates back in the soil. Now, from the soil, it can also end up in marine environments. It actually dissolves in the water as dissolved phosphate. And we have the same kind of cycle here. Marine plants take up the dissolved phosphate. Marine plants get eaten by marine animals. And then when those marine animals defecate or die, that again cycles back into the dissolved phosphate. Now, one of the things that happens in marine environments is sediment. And sediment builds layer after layer after layer after layer and eventually turns into rock. And that's where our mountains come from. So sediment forms rock. We have rock formation. And we'll actually find pockets of phosphate that we mine in the ground. We'll come back to why we do that. Okay, so those rocks can also be weathered or eroded back into the water supply. Okay, so something that you need to understand about phosphate is that it is the rate limiting nutrient for how fast plants grow. So how fast plants grow depends on how much phosphate they have available to them. So what we'll do is we will mine phosphate, or we will take manure that has phosphate in it and make fertilizer for plants. Most fertilizers that farms will use contain phosphorus or phosphates. So we'll put those on our crops, and that causes them to grow bigger and taller and stronger, faster. And that's good. But then when it rains, any extra is going to cause what we call runoff. And that just means that phosphate gets washed into the water. And that might not sound like a big deal, but it is. It causes the marine plants to grow and grow and grow. And then the marine animals grow and grow and grow. Seems like a good thing, right? If the marine animals grow faster than the environment is able to support, and there's not enough food for them and so forth, they die. And that process by which you overfeed phosphate to marine plants and then animals and results in them dying is called eutrophication. Okay, so in this video, you have learned phosphorus is very reactive, so we usually talk about phosphate. It's found in ATP and DNA. You've learned about the cycle between the soil, plants, and animals. You've learned about why we use it for fertilizer, and you've learned about eutrophication.